Hi everyone, this will be the wrap-up episode of Political Prude, the podcast PE2023 special. Now, so many of you told us that you would love one final episode to just wrap up this season, so the team here said, okay, let's just do it. And we went ahead and invited someone who I thought was the perfect person to end off the season with, Professor Tommy Koh. Now, he's a Singaporean diplomat, lawyer, professor, and author who served as Singapore's permanent representative to the United Nations between 1968 and 1971. Now, to me, he has always been such a respectable voice of reason, and my friends and I are always discussing his opinions and commentary on our WhatsApp group chats. So to be able to speak with him is truly such an honor and such a pinch me moment, you know. Prof Koh actually wrote a post endorsing Mr. Tharman for PE 2023, and now that the election is over, I actually want to speak to Prof Koh to pick his brain on the election results and also, more importantly, what Mr. Tharman's win means for us. So the elections may be over and we will be taking a short break after this, but the zodapop podcast network will have so much more content coming your way. Political Prude, the podcast, will also return. So if you're watching on YouTube, please click the subscribe button, and if you're listening in from Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts, click that follow button. And now, Professor Tommy Koh. Professor Tommy Koh, welcome to Political Prude, the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be with you.
I'm so honored. I'm so excited to discuss the results and really what to look forward to after this. So let's begin the conversation by really looking at the results of the PE 2023.
Right.
I mean, from the beginning, I think a lot of people were expecting Mr. Tharman to actually win.
Yes.
But what I think surprised a lot of people was the margin of victory. When I remember watching with my peers around me and looking at the sample count, and they said 70%, Tharman, and all of us went like, really?
Wow.
Really? We're like, what?
Yeah. It's such a big contrast to the last contested election.
Indeed.
2011, right? Which was a cliffhanger, went on all night long.
Yeah, so a lot of us were actually really on standby to actually stay up till 4 a.m., 5 a.m.
Right.
But once the sample count came in, we were like, oh, okay, it's gonna be a short night this time around.
Right.
In your opinion, why do you think he did so well? We all expect him to do well, but not this well. So what were the key reasons in which resulted in his
First,
results?
I must congratulate the electorate. I think the Singapore electorate behaved with maturity, it behaved with discernment, and behaved with fairness. I think the electorate understood that this is a presidential election, it's not a general election. And that you should judge Tharman not on the basis that he was a PAP member, but on his track record and your view of his character, And I think attempts by, Kin Lian to try to politicize didn't work, And also, when Kok Song towards the end of the campaign, he campaigned very well actually, but I didn't like the fact that at the end of the campaign he turned negative, and started attacking both Kin Lian with reason, and then with again Tharman. I think going negative didn't work this time, So I'm very impressed that for the electorate they wanted the campaign to remain positive.
Right. Got it.
Yeah.
So in terms of how Mr. Tharman performed, what do you think were the key things that we can say made him do so well?
I'm biased, I'm not in that I was a supporter of Tharman.
Understood.
And on nomination day, I in fact wrote something on my Facebook to say, although I'm a friend of all three candidates, I know Kok Song and I know Kin Lian, but in my view, he was the best candidate. And I gave 4 reasons why, Tharman is one of these people who transcend race.
Okay.
Yeah. So people don't see him as an Indian candidate. He transcends his race. He's a unifying figure. If you look at his track record in Taman Jurong, right? The electorate in Taman Jurong gave him every general election a thumping majority, which shows that his support base is not just Indian, but cuts across the races, So I think that helped. But also people liked the fact that he kept the campaign positive, And he didn't say anything negative about the other candidate. He just talked about his own qualifications, his dreams of the future, even his slogan, right?
Yes.
Respect for all. I think it resonated with people. And I think Jane was a secret weapon.
Mm.
You know,
How so?
I think the electorate like the fact that they have a long and happy marriage, that Jane was his intellectual equal, but that she also has a very good heart. She's been helping prisoners, poor people, and underprivileged people. And also one more thing, the fact that she's half Chinese and a fluent Teochew speaker helped to connect with the Chinese ground, I think. Even the choice of the pineapple online
Yes.
was a very successful calculation to choose a symbol that is meaningful to the Chinese community.
Got it. So the landslide victory, of course, came at the expense of the other two candidates. Did you expect them to perform the way they did respectively?
Frankly, nobody knew. I mean, we didn't know what to expect, right?
Yeah.
Kok Song was relatively unknown until he came forward. I mean, for those of us who knew his good work at MAS and GIC, always admired him for his ability and his humility, you know. But nobody thought he would seek public office. So this came as a surprise, you know. He did a good job campaigning. Lian had tried before, as you know,
Yes.
in 2011, and he didn't do well then. I think he did better. He went from 4.9 to nearly 14%. But obviously the electorate did not see him as someone who had the potential to be a president of Singapore.
Understood. So for Mr. Ng Kok Song, I think I did a poll on Instagram, and a lot of young adults said that they were actually very surprised by his results. They thought that he would do much, much better. Where do you think things went wrong for him?
I think turning negative was not a good move by him.
Okay.
He should remain positive, you know.
When you're saying turning negative, you meant towards the end of the campaign where he was speaking about...
He was questioning Tharman's independence, you know. He was emphasizing his own non-partisanship and then saying that Tharman cannot be independent. How can you go from being finance minister to be custodian? I didn't understand the logic of his argument.
So on the other side is Mr. Tan Kin Lian, right?
Yeah.
So we have 2011 to refer to, and he, as you mentioned, he really did much better this time around. And the surprising thing for a lot of us was that, you know, this time around there was a lot more controversy based on some of his social media posts, his comments made on other podcasts, for example. But he still managed to get more votes this time around. So do you think it was perhaps the endorsement by Mr. Tan Cheng Bock, or do you think it was something else that allowed people to say, I'm going to
I think the endorsement by both my friends, Cheng Bock and Ji Se, was counterproductive.
Okay.
Because the electorate saw it as an attempt to politicize the presidential election, which the electorate didn't want. You know, they want to make a clear distinction between the presidential election and the general election. You know, that did not help him. I thought he would get more votes because there's always an anti-establishment, anti-PAP vote, you know, and I thought he might get more than that.
Why do you think it's important for us to not politicize the presidential elections?
Because the president is supposed to be somebody above partisan politics. You know, he's supposed to be a unifying figure. You may in the past have an affiliation with a party, but it doesn't mean that going forward you do not have the capacity to be independent. And the best example of this would be Ong Teng Cheong, you know, who was a very senior member of the PAP, member of the cabinet. But when he became president, he was quite fierce, you know, protector of the powers of presidency. He even brought a lawsuit against the government.
Got it.
You know?
Yes.
So I always give the example of Ong Teng Cheong to say that you cannot judge a person's future performance on the basis of his past affiliation.
Understood. So I guess what's on a lot of people's minds is whether or not Mr. Tharman will be able to perform his duties in a non-partisan way. So do you think that he'll be able to do so?
I've known him for a very long time, you know, and he's a man with a certain independence of mind. And I think he will not compromise his integrity, you know. When it comes to carrying out the duties of president, he would do it well, and he would not feel under pressure to do his former political allies a favor. So to give you an example, if, for example, he's presented with a candidate for appointment to a key position of public service, and in his best judgment, the person is not qualified for the job, I have no question but that he will veto the appointment.
Has there been past instances in which we have seen this example of independence of mind that Mr. Tharman has exhibited?
I think that it was well known that within the cabinet, he belonged to the faction that wanted to make Singapore more equal, less unequal.
Okay.
To initiate social policy that would benefit the low-income families and the disadvantaged.
Understood. So there are a lot of people who actually saw the PE as a proxy for the general election. So of course, we understand that the role is above politics, but following that same line of thought, like, do you think the results for this PE, which was overwhelmingly positive for Mr. Tharman, can it be seen as a barometer of support for the PAP?
No. And the PAP will be making a serious misjudgment if it were to infer from the big victory for Tharman that it's an endorsement of the party, and that the ground is sweet, The two things are different and separate.
When we're entering the PE, I mean, it was off the back of a lot of like political scandals, So why do you think people were willing to set that aside?
I was a bit worried that the scandals might touch him, But I think they again, as I say, that he's not representing the PAP, He's representing himself, his character, his track record, his international standing, and people were impressed by him. And also, don't forget, the good work that he and Jane did for 22 years on the ground in Tharman, I think meant a lot,
I mean, looking back at PE 2023, now that it all is done and dusted, was there anything that surprised you, or were there any lessons that perhaps you learned that was different from other PEs or other GEs even?
I think Tharman's big majority was a surprise.
Okay.
Yeah, I was optimistic that he will win, but I wasn't sure by what margin. I didn't expect him to get 70% of the vote. That was a big surprise. I also thought that Kok Song and Kin Len will combined have more than 30% of the vote.
Right.
Yeah. And so I was surprised too. I got it wrong. And also, I'm going to tell you one thing more, During the campaign, one day I went to a service station to fill up my tank.
Okay.
And this person asked me, who are you going to vote for? I said, I'm going to vote for Tharman. I was really shocked by his rudeness and said, I'll never vote for an Indian candidate.
Wow.
Yeah. That rocked me a little bit, And I was asking myself, what percentage of the ethnic Chinese electorate share his feeling that we will only support the Chinese candidate? But I think the result shows that the percentage of Chinese chauvinists is very small.
Yeah.
And so the big lesson for me is race is never irrelevant, but PE23 show us that race is not decisive. It's the merit of the candidate that's decisive.
I agree. I think a lot of, especially the younger Singaporeans, we kind of assume that, like the issue of race isn't that huge anymore, right? We always say like, how can anyone think that way, that someone will vote for someone just entirely based on race? This was a similar lesson for me as well, because when I was doing all the digital content on social media, of course, I'm also monitoring the comments that come in. And there were some comments that were entirely like against Mr. Tharman solely because of race as well. Yeah. And it's shocking to see that in today's age. Yeah. But I just want to say that it is still, something that is present. It's just that not loud anymore.
Yeah. It will never go away. It will never go away. But with the passing years, the numbers of whether Chinese chauvinists or Indian chauvinists will shrink. And the percentage of the population that rise above race and will focus on the merit of the candidate will rise. So this is the happy news that come out of the election, no?
Absolutely. So just one last final question about the reflections on PE. What do you think the results say about Singaporeans today?
The Singapore electorate came through very well. It showed maturity, discernment, and fairness. It wanted to focus on the merit of the three candidates and not be distracted by attempts to politicize the election or to go negative, I think full marks to the Singapore electorate. And it's also very good for Singapore, you know. It's really heartwarming to know that when we have a minority candidate of exceptional quality, he transcends race.
Absolutely.
And Singaporean, all races will support him, you know.
Yes. So we look back at episode 1 with Dr. Lian of this show, and we understand from that episode that the president plays 3 crucial roles,
Yes.
right? So one is the constitutional role, the
Yes.
second is the ceremonial role, and the third one is the community role. So for the next part of our conversation,
Yeah.
I would like to discuss what we can expect, perhaps, you know, from Mr. Tharman. Of course, we can't predict the future, but I think that we could look back at his long history in politics to see perhaps what can the presidency look like under him.
Can I add one more role?
Sure.
Yeah. I think the president also has the diplomatic role.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's not written in the Constitution, but it's a consequence of his status as head of state. I don't know whether you know that all Singapore ambassadors receive their letters of credence from the president.
I never knew that.
Yeah, not from the prime minister, or foreign member from president. And all incoming ambassadors have to present the letters of credence to the president.
Right.
Yeah, and visiting heads of state, heads of government, other leaders will often request a call on the president. You know, so president has to have the knowledge, presence of mind, articulation to engage with foreign leaders. And one of the things the president makes is to go on state visits to other countries.
Right.
And it's a very high signature, no? Because he's head of state, the most important person in our hierarchy. When the president visits another country, it's a very high signature event. It shows the great importance that we attach to that country, you know.
Hello, help us get more guests like Professor Tommy Koh. You can support our small but growing channel by clicking subscribe or follow. It is entirely free, but it really, really helps us. A thumbs up and 5-star rating also goes a long way. And now, back to the episode. So perhaps before we go into the 3 roles, let's talk about him as a diplomat, right?
Okay.
Because from what I'm hearing from a lot of people, they say that he's an exceptional diplomat.
At the risk of offending all the preceding presidents, I would say on your program that in my view, we've never had a president so well qualified to represent Singapore abroad. Tharman's exceptional. You know, he's well regarded by the UN, which I think made him co-chair of a very important commission on water, well regarded by IMF, well regarded by G20. He's the chairman of a group of 30 financial experts of the world, you know. I mean, we've never produced a person with such high international standing, you know. So we're very fortunate, at least in MFA, I feel very fortunate that I have a future chief diplomat of Singapore who will keep our flag flying very high, you know.
Absolutely. And perhaps you could spell it out for our audience, right? Like what value does that bring? Like why is it important for Singapore to have such a diplomat with high international standings?
For a small country, our connectivity is important, you know. The fact that he's connected to so many important institutions means he can open doors for us. If we have an agenda to pursue, he can help us pursue that agenda. The foreign minister can give it a first push. The prime minister give it a bigger push. But the person who can push it across the red line is the president.
Oh,
Yes.
one would assume that it would be the PM.
No.
Why the president?
Because constitutionally, the president is head of state. And in our hierarchy, in every country's hierarchy, the president ranks above the prime minister.
Okay, thanks for explaining that to us. So now let's go into the 3 roles, and starting with the constitutional role.
Right.
So since 1991, the president has been empowered to veto government budgets and also key public appointments if there are reasons to do so, and he's advised by the Council of Presidential Advisors on such matters. So during this PE itself, I think that's what the other 2 candidates were also focusing on, you know, the ability to have this constitutional responsibility. So do you believe that President-elect Tharman will be able to exercise his duties responsibly?
Of course, but you missed out something.
Oh,
Not just to veto budget, but to give his approval or not give his approval, to request to draw on our reserves.
oh yes, 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 yes.
That's a very important function because we have very substantial reserves, and they are our funds for a rainy day. And we've experienced some rainy days in the last decade or so. But the president he holds the second key. He safeguards the reserve and prevent an unwise use of our reserve. But he, as you say correctly, he can also veto budgets.
Right.
And he can veto appointments to key positions in our public service.
Got it. Yeah. So actually, throughout the campaigning period, I think some people mentioned that having someone to properly safeguard our reserves is very important because it is also a matter of national security.
Yeah.
I think some of us might find it difficult to relate the reserves to national security.
So let me give you an example why it is a source of national security. Some years ago, when Saddam Hussein was president of Iraq, he invaded Kuwait and attempted to incorporate Kuwait into the territory of Iraq. It was terrible for the Iraqis. The place was destroyed, and fortunately, I don't know whether you know, Kuwait has the first sovereign wealth fund and very substantial reserve. So in that time of great adversity, Kuwait survived, partly of course because the UN, led by the United States, sent in its armed forces and repelled the Iraqi invaders. But economically, Kuwait survived because it was able to draw on its very substantial reserve accumulated over many decades. So that's an example.
Now let's move on to the next two roles, right? The ceremonial role as well as the community role. How do you think he'll perform for those two roles?
I think the ceremonial role, which I would also call a community role, right, is domestic. It does got nothing to do with our relations to the world. During the campaign, I like the fact that Tharman said, if I'm elected, I will be the first volunteer of Singapore. That touched me because I've been championing volunteerism. I think a good society is one in which a very high percentage of the citizens work as volunteers for a cause close to their heart. And for him to champion volunteerism is a very good thing. And as you know, he's crazy about sports, right?
Yes.
So for the first time, you have a president who's a champion of sports, So this is good. I hope he can inject some life into our football, football community, and bring back the glory days of the past.
I think a lot of people would love that, actually.
Yeah, and the other thing is that Jane is tremendously helpful to him in that she's been focusing on helping the disadvantaged, the marginalized, the poor. I'll give you an example. When I was chairman of NHB, I appointed Jane to chair the Singapore Art Museum, And one day she said, can I open an exhibition at the museum? I said, of course, happy to do that. Then I found out to my surprise that it's a museum whose exhibits were created by prisoners, And I asked Jane, how did you manage to create such beautiful works? She has been bringing art teachers to teach art to the prisoners.
Right.
And some of the prisoners have artistic talent, One of them is now a professional potter and one of the 10 assenters of Tharman's nomination.
Right.
So Jane has complimented Tharman's good work by reaching out to these communities.
What do you think that says about her as a person, right? Her personality, her values.
She's very warm and approachable, and she's not standoffish, not aloof. I think she's very much a people person. So she combined a brilliant mind with a very good heart, I think.
Absolutely. I was on a panel on Channel 8 as well, and they asked, do you think that she added points to his campaign? And I said, absolutely. I think also when you see them together, she brings out a softer side to him, a lighthearted side to him that I think perhaps made people relate more to him as well. I think a lot of us, previously saw him as this like minister, right? and like, whoa, and he's always very
Very
serious.
cerebral, very cerebral.
Yes, yes. But I mean, perhaps it was social media as a platform as well. But whenever the two of them appeared during the campaign on social media videos, we always saw that lighthearted, even casual, candid side to him, and I thought that made people like him a lot more. Yeah.
And since you talk about social media, can I say that one of the distinguishing the characteristic of this election compared to other elections is the role played by social media. Yeah, social media really emerged. It becomes such an important platform for all the candidates.
Yeah.
And I must say that most of them very good at it.
Yeah. So I mean, I can also like pull up the curtains a little bit on this and say that actually most of the candidates or presidential hopefuls, they had teams working behind them. I can share that Mr. Tharman, Mr. Ng Kok Song, and Mr. George Goh all had professional people helping them with social media. And you could really see that their campaigns were really put together by people who are very savvy with the platforms. And I think that changes the game entirely, because I think for future elections, you'll be putting yourself at a disadvantage if you don't have a team behind you.
I was a bit worried when the election department said it discouraged the candidates from having rallies, because in the past, it was the rallies that brought people together, So I was wondering, without rallies, how are the candidates going to meet people, communicate by message? So two things became prominent. One, social media, and the second, our hawker centers. No, really, our hawker centers.
I've always related the two as the same concept, the same idea actually, because when GE 2020 happened, I think that's when it was really the first election that we really saw what the potential of what social media can look like, right? So I was using Instagram back then, and that's where really the platform came about. And I was explaining to everyone, in the past, campaigning would be going to places like hawker centers where everybody congregates, and then you get to meet a lot of people there.
Right.
In the same vein, social media is the same thing. You're going to instead of a hawker center, now at a social media platform where a lot of people are congregating, and then you get to like introduce yourself to people in that way. It's just that on social media, it is on a much larger scale.
Right.
But it's quite interesting also to hear from other people that, as we can see from Mr. Tharman's campaign, and also then Mr. Ng Kok Song's campaign, who ran a fully digital campaign, like social media followers does not entirely translate to votes itself. People might be interested and might engage with your content, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of Singaporeans are still able to look at full picture and also take into consideration other aspects as well. So that's definitely food for thought. But yeah, I do think that moving forward, social media will play a huge
even more
part.
important,
In terms of communications during elections, actually, yes. And I think podcasts will be will be one. In fact, I think when we were doing this show particularly, we really didn't expect it to reach so many people. I think we have been doing podcasts for a while, and the numbers we see the numbers, right? But when I guess it was lightning in a bottle. Like everybody was just interested to hear more from the candidates. When you have a privilege of sitting down 1 hour with each one of them, it really becomes very intimate, and you really get to see their personalities come out. Yeah, so it's quite interesting on that end. So jumping off our discussion about like their roles in the community, during the campaigning period, Mr. Tharman actually, as you said, came forward to say, "I will be the first volunteer," or I'll really help the people on the ground and support ground up initiatives. I do think that when people voted for him, it was a vote for perhaps a more optimistic future for Singapore. But I also think that a lot of young people like us are a little bit cynical. We're like, are you sure? Because more and more we see kind of like a divided world,
Yes.
especially exacerbated by social media. So do you think this ideal world of optimism and solidarity is really achievable in Singapore?
But it's better to be optimistic than pessimistic, right?
That's true.
Especially in a leader. I mean, as a leader, you have to give hope to your followers. I mean, can you imagine having a president who's pessimist? I mean, you can't lead a country or people if you don't have a sense of confidence in yourself, your people, their future. No, he's right to be optimistic. And now he has to deliver on some of his promises, And I think it'd be good if he were to champion sport, champion volunteerism, champion ground-up initiatives to make Singapore a more equal, a more caring, and a better place.
Yes. I think he said it with so much conviction that I think people were like, oh, I think he just might, So I think that was what a lot of my peers were thinking also. They were very convinced by the way he so confidently said it. It's kind of like, okay, if you're going to be that confident.
I mean, I think he was sincere.
He was.
In a way, it's also up to the rest of us to help him carry out his pledges.
Absolutely. So now that we know that he will become president soon enough.
14th September.
Yes. What do you think will be some of the key challenges that he will face in the next couple of years or during his term as president?
His challenges are to some extent the country's challenges.
True.
And the country's challenges are to some extent the world's challenges.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we are now living in a world again divided into rival blocs. You have a bloc led by the United States, another bloc led by China. We don't want to be aligned to either bloc. We want to be friends with both the United States and China. I think we are also now living in a world with some negative trend. I think there are many challenges to free trade. The Americans have turned their back on free trade and become protectionists. The support for multilateralism is on the decline. The rule of law has been so seriously broken by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, And I think that there are many challenges in this world, no? So it really takes Singapore a lot of skill, courage, knowledge to navigate this divided, unstable, and dangerous world. No? And I think the president, in partnership with the prime minister, can help us.
So on the flip side to that will be perhaps some of the opportunities that can come about.
Sure.
So what do you think will be some of the key opportunities that will be coming his way and also, I guess, Singapore's way?
I think the world is going through a new industrial revolution.
Okay.
It's not just digital, it's biotechnology, it's AI. I think many countries will I wouldn't say destroyed, will be disadvantaged because they are not well prepared for the fourth industrial revolution. They've not educated their people well. Many of them have the wrong mindset of resisting change and technology. I think we have the right mindset. We've educated our people well. I think we will be one of the winners of this new industrial revolution. So I'm very optimistic, Yeah. My concern is that in any revolution, it is the gifted, talented people who will benefit the most.
Okay.
So it may make our social divide even greater, you see. So the challenge for the PM and for the incoming president is, how can we narrow this divide, How can we take care of people who are the loser, not winner, but losers of this new industrial revolution, How do we make sure that they don't feel angry, alienated, and like people in America become angry voters, We don't want that in Singapore, So I see many opportunities, I think that as a small country, but a thought leader, we can galvanize small countries to the world, as we have done in the UN, creating the Forum of Small States, consisting of 108 members, to make the world a safer and better place for small country.
Prof, you mentioned many times now, like the PM and president working hand in hand together. Yes. Perhaps you could help us illustrate, what that relationship is like. Because I think until perhaps this PE, a lot of us have always seen the two as separate roles. But throughout the campaign period, we realized that, hey, actually the two of them can actually come together and work hand in hand.
I think in general, they should work in harmony with each other. The president has no power to pursue his own foreign policy or domestic policy, But I think the custom is for them to meet once a week, so they have a chance to speak in privacy, in confidence, and the president can share his ideas with the prime minister. And if the prime minister respects the president, he may take on board some of the good ideas, Occasionally, of course, the relation may become conflictful. If the president feels that a key appointment that the prime minister wishes to make is not a qualified candidate, that would be a conflictful situation, Or if the prime minister wanted to draw on reserve in a manner that the president and the council or presidential advisor think unwise, that would be a conflictful situation. But on most times, they work as partners, and they pursue the same interests.
Got it. So I guess the elephant in the room is that PM Lee has said that my succession plans are now back on track, right? Which also means then I think everybody's thinking about who the next PM is, and most likely the next PM will be the one working with President Tharman in his tenure. So
it's not most likely. The next PM will certainly be Lawrence Wong.
Yes.
I think it's been decided, right?
Okay. So yes. So TPM Lawrence Wong will be the person that will be working.
He will be our fourth prime minister.
He will be our fourth prime
minister.
minister.
He will be our fourth prime minister.
And he will be working with President Tharman, right? So we are not maybe privy to kind of like the relationship that the two of them already share. Perhaps you could give us some insight onto how the two of them.
I don't.
They don't know. Okay.
I mean, I know the current PM has great respect for Tharman, and they work together as colleagues in the cabinet for many years, But with DPM Lawrence Wong, I don't know. But I assume that the 4G leaders will also have a respectful attitude towards Tharman in the light of his record at home and abroad,
Absolutely. So I think all in all, knowing what is coming our way with regards to the leadership changes and whatnot, I do think that this is painting a very optimistic future for Singapore, if I'm being honest. Yeah. So last question would be for, I guess, our young listeners to take away from this episode. Is there any final words you'd like to share with them with regards to what they can look forward to with Mr. Tharman as our president?
I think my message to young Singaporeans is that Singaporeans have come through this presidential election in a wonderful manner. It has shown that the electorate is matured. It has picked a new president on his merit, not on his race, and that the electorate actually punishes candidates that turn negative and attack other candidates. This is so wonderful, And we have a wonderful president and a wonderful first lady, so we should celebrate this.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time that we have. So thank you, Professor Tommy Koh, for coming to this show. It's been really an honor to speak to you. I think just 2 years ago, all of us were always discussing all your Facebook posts, among our friendship groups and WhatsApp chats. And for me to speak to you in person, I'm very honored and appreciate your time.
Thank you. Keep up your good work.
Thank you. All right, guys, that's it for the first season of Political Prude, the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. Now, we have actually received so much feedback from you guys, so between now and the next time you see us, we will be working on improving the quality of this show. Subscribe to the channel if you're on YouTube, and give us a follow on Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts. Now, this show was very proudly brought to you by Zodapop by Zurich Media. We are a podcast community and network. So if you're looking for a media house to help you launch a podcast, or if you're a creator looking for a community to start your journey with, we are here to welcome you with open arms. If you want to check out some of the other shows that we produce or other creator-led shows within the community, just search up Zodapop by Zurich Media on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and they should come up. This has been Political Prude, the podcast, and I'll see you next time. This was the Zodapop podcast.